Welcome to Fairy Tale Access, where the head fairy's quest is to prove that fairy tales do exist in actual time, rather than once upon a time. Together, we will unravel the heroes, young and old, who turn dreams into reality. These are the people who still believe in happily ever after. The discoveries will bend even our most cynical non-believers into believing in fairy tales. Welcome to Fairy Tale Access. Today, we're going to unravel the story behind Fahim Speaks and find out about a true life adventurer. And with me, I have the author, Professor Michael Moffat, also Lieutenant Colonel with the United States Marine Corps, now retired.
Correct.
Okay. How did you get assigned as the Marine Corps historian? I didn't even know they had a historian.
Well, a lot of people don't know that, Denise. First of all, thank you for having me down here to Nashua. It's great to be here. And Marine Corps historian, yes. I joined the Marines in 1982. That's a long time ago, I know. And was an infantry officer and did a lot of eventual command duty and staff assignments and special assignments. And as I closed out my career, I hooked up with Marine Corps History Division as a reservist and did some projects with them. And then for 2010, I had the chance to get one-year orders to do a special assignment, which included traveling to Afghanistan for several months. And as a historian, my job, I went over there by myself, was to travel around Marine Corps combat outposts and forward operating bases and just talk to Marines, interview Marines, take pictures, gather some documents to help document the story of what was going on in Helmand Province in Afghanistan, where most of the Marines were. So I get there in February of 2010, and I was there through May, traveling, interviewing people, and which is where I met Fahim Fazli, the subject of our book.
How did you meet him?
How did I meet Fahim? Well, March of 2010, my travels took me to Delaram, which is a crossroads town in northern Helmand Province. And I was pretty fortunate, as a lieutenant colonel on a special assignment, I could kind of chart my own course and look at the map and talk to the operations people and see, what's going on, when and where. And the 3rd Battalion of the 4th Marine Regiment, what we call 3-4 in the Marines, that was their AO, their area of operations up around Delaram. And they actually knew I was in country, and one of their officers alerted me that they were going to have a little operation that I was excited. I'm an infantry guy. I was excited to go up and be in travel with them out to this outpost where they're going to have a raid. And so I was up there with that battalion, and after that experience, I went to Delaram, where the battalion headquarters was. And there was an event in Delaram at the battalion headquarters where the regional district governor, some call him a sub-governor, Asadullah Haq Dost, was actually giving an award to Lieutenant Colonel Martin Wetterauer, who is the battalion commander for 3-4. And just an aside, his call sign at the time was Dark Side 6, and we refer to him as Dark Side 6 in the book, but Lieutenant Colonel Wetterauer, as a lieutenant, was the commander of the platoon that famously rescued Scott O'Grady, for those who remember the behind enemy lines Air Force pilot who was shot down in Serbia, which is a movie connection to our project. So anyway, back to Delaram. So Lieutenant Colonel Wetterauer was receiving an award from the district governor. So I was there as well to take some photos and to meet some people and interview some people. And while I was there at this little event, they had an award presentation, and then we had a little humble banquet of sorts. Banquet's kind of a strong word for where we were in Afghanistan, but there was an interpreter, a translator there, and he spoke Pashto and Dari, the Afghan languages, and somebody at the reception pointed to him. He had a big beard, and they said, "Oh, it's Fahim. He's one of our interpreters, translators, and he's a Hollywood actor." And I said, "Oh, really? I mean, you're always, as a writer, a historian, you're looking for angles or interesting people." And I said, "Well, tell me more." And I found out that he had been on a number of Spike TV shows, 24. He was in Iron Man and was advisor to Charlie Wilson's War, and typecast as a terrorist. So I learned about that. I was intrigued, and as it happened, he happened to sit across from me at our little table, so I started talking to him. And he's very charismatic. You know, he doesn't mind talking. He's a translator and an actor, and so I talked to him, found out more about his journey, and I was kind of fascinated by his journey. And I found out that in talking to him, and I did an interview with him later. He was born and raised in Kabul, the capital. His mother was...
The capital of
yes,
Afghanistan.
Kabul, yes. Some say Kabul, or I say Kabul,
Okay.
the Afghan capital. His mother was a midwife for the Afghan president, Hafizullah Amin, who was killed in 1979 when the Soviets came in. So he had quite a story, and his family was separated, and he fought the communists in different ways as a youngster, and eventually made a harrowing escape from Kabul to Pakistan, where he was in a refugee camp, and then in Islamabad as a refugee for a couple of years. Eventually made his way to America. And so I learned all this talking to him, and then we exchanged business cards and stayed in touch. And I can go on to tell you more about his journey, but I know you have a few questions.
I do. Well, he was a refugee. Then he was an actor. How did he end up in the Marines?
Well,
how did you end up meeting him at an American military base back in Afghanistan after he had escaped?
Great question, and that's why I think it's a great story. And folks who've had a chance to read or find out about Fahim's story, they tend to agree. You know, what a story he has. Yeah, he made his way to America, and always wanted to be a Hollywood actor. Was in his blood, and wanted to perform. And he hung in there for many years. His first movie was Rambo 3, where he was just an extra. Rambo went back to Afghanistan, if you remember Rambo 3, and took on the Soviet war machine. So anyway, he did these jobs as an actor, as an extra, and eventually it took him 15 years to get his SAG, Screen Actors Guild card, which opened up a lot more opportunities, doors for him to do things in Hollywood. But he, when he was advisor for Charlie Wilson's War, working with Tom Hanks and Julia Roberts and Philip Seymour Hoffman. In fact, Tom Hanks actually did a blurb for our cover. So Tom Hanks worked with Fahim a little bit during Charlie Wilson's War, which is about Congressman Charlie Wilson's amazing secret efforts to support the anti-Soviet Mujahideen movement during the 1980s. So Charlie Wilson said to Fahim during the filming of this movie, you know, you speak the languages, you know Afghanistan, you should think about going back someday to help out. So that's part of his reason for looking into going back. And also, he's a patriot. You know, he's that person that we so want to see, a refugee immigrant from an Islamic culture who came here the right way, waited in line, learned the language, became a naturalized citizen, paid his taxes, paid his dues, loves America, and actually went back, qualified as an interpreter. He saw a commercial somewhere in California looking for interpreters. So he went and qualified as an interpreter. He went to Fort Benning and Army base and was trained. And at Fort Benning, they asked all these interpreter candidates, okay, you know, who wants to work with the Air Force or the Army? And nobody wanted to work with the Marines, hardly, because the Marines, you know, they all knew the Marines are in Helmand Province, which is a rough place. A volatile, violent place where interpreters can get hurt, and as opposed to being an interpreter at a headquarters place in Kabul. But Fahim asked to be with the Marines, and why? Well, part of it, when he was a refugee in Islamabad as a teenager, he first saw Marines at the American Embassy. And he actually tried to join the Marines when he was like 22 years old. When he came to America and was in California, he went to see a recruiter, but his English was not good enough. He just didn't have the language skills at that time to get in the Marines, so he went back in different directions and get into Hollywood. So he qualified as interpreter, asked to be with the Marines, and ended up with 3-4. And in 2009, October of 2009, he returned to Afghanistan as an interpreter, where he served to such great effect as a charismatic, funny interpreter, translator who loved Afghan people, loved Marines, brought them together so much so that the Taliban hated him probably as much as anybody because he's their worst nightmare. Somebody with a big beard, spoke the languages.
So you didn't make him shave off his beard as a Marine?
No, that's a good point. No, he didn't have to shave his beard as a Marine. Marines do shave every day, but for cultural reasons, he said, I can be a better, more effective interpreter if I look Afghan. So he brought Americans and Afghans together to such effect that the Taliban put a price on his head. 300,000 Afghanis, which is like $6,000, which is a lot. Obviously,
a lot of money for
nobody
them.
collected because he made it home, but and it's all in the book. Wonderful story.
Wow. So the Goodwill Ambassador, how does this book turn into a love story? Because a lot of the reviews talked about that. So.
Yes, and the reviews have been wonderful, Denise. I'm glad you had a chance to look at some of them. And when I talk about the book, I say it's an adventure story, his harrowing escape from Afghanistan. It's a Hollywood story. He became a Screen Actors Guild member working the biggest names in Hollywood. It's a war story. It goes back with the Marines. But the love story part, chapter 6 is called Love and Marriages because he had a couple of arranged marriages the same year with Afghan brides that obviously didn't work out so well. It's poignant. Part of it's funny, the story of his two arranged marriages. And eventually, he had to go back. He went to Pakistan, actually, for one of these arranged marriages that lasted a day. And I went,
the whole day?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. It was a horrible day, as it turned out, for Fahim. It's in the book, chapter 6. But he came back to America and met an American woman and found true love the American way and eventually married Amy. And they have a daughter, Sophie. And the love story, the way that he ended up meeting Amy, he kind of had to go through all these different places in his journey to position himself and learn lessons about life and love and women. In fact, the book is dedicated to women, his mother, and to women. Dedicated to you, Denise. Dedicated to the women of the world. So,
why did he do that?
Well, sadly, his mother died about a year ago, Fahima, his mother, and he was very sad about that. He was very excited about us working to bring his story to reality as a published book. And his mother died in November of 2011, shortly before we finished it. So he dedicated not just to her, but to the women of Afghanistan, the women of the world, particularly in Afghanistan. As you may know, it's a difficult place for females culturally and in that society. And I think so many of us who know a little bit about Afghanistan and that part of the world believe that for things to get better, women need to be empowered. Instead of being married off at age 14 and stuck in a mud hut the rest of their lives, to have them empowered and to play a different role, a more active role in their society. Now, it's kind of touchy to talk about. I mean, it's their society. I mean, who am I or who are we to say, okay, women need to have more power? But Fahim believes that, and I believe that if and when women do get the opportunity to assert themselves more in Afghanistan, that'll temper the violent warrior strains in that culture. And again, I'm trying to be careful. Somebody who might be watching this will say, who are you, Mike or Fahim, to say, give women more power. But he thinks that that's key to Afghanistan. So the book is dedicated to women.
Very nice. Well, I think mothers would be more likely not to want their sons to go off to war. and I think that would help. Or just, yeah, and the ability to be able to talk freely and what express yourself. When you were there, were you able to meet with Afghans, women and men, when you were talking with Fahim to get this story?
A few. Most of my interactions were with Marines, and I did meet a number of native Afghans, of course, mostly men, because the women have a very non-public role in Afghanistan. I did meet a few Afghan women, but not very many because of the nature of the culture and the society in Afghanistan.
Wow. What was it like on the front lines getting this story? Was there a lot of gunfire going on? Was there battles? Was it quiet? Was it just looking? Was there something lurking that you couldn't put your finger on? What was going on at the time?
Well, Denise, you mentioned the front lines, and this type of war in Afghanistan, there really isn't a linear front in the same sense that World War II or Korea had like battle lines with, it's a guerrilla type war. So the front lines, so to speak, the combat outposts that I visited were enclaves in different parts of Helmand province, and around those enclaves were the enemy or the Taliban, who were engaged in guerrilla warfare type activities.
For somebody that's not familiar with the difference, what is guerrilla warfare activities?
Yeah, guerrilla warfare is like where you do not have like set piece forces like fighting across a standard traditional battlefield. Guerrilla tactics or guerrillas are non-traditional type warriors or military forces who like hit and run. Vietnam famously, the Viet Cong used guerrilla tactics, like the Americans used during the Revolutionary War. They would, they wouldn't have the firepower to take on a superior military force, so they would snipe at them or ambush them, and then melt away into the woods or the jungle or the mountains or whatever. Mm-hmm. So that was the challenge in Afghanistan, was to counter guerrilla warfare, where they tend not to wear uniforms really, and they melt away into the populace. They'll set a lot of mines, IEDs, improvised explosive devices. That was really their biggest weapon, is mines and IEDs, and sometimes.
But doesn't that affect their own people? Don't their own?
Yes, great point, Denise. Yes, a lot of their own people get blown up by the mines that the Taliban put in. And sometimes the Taliban themselves blow themselves up, and then they come and we try to fix them, which is quite ironic. So anyway, that one mission that I went on, I described earlier, which was a raid out near Bakwa in western Helmand province. They were trying to catch drug dealers, people aligned with the Taliban who were running drugs and selling drugs and heroin and poppy production, mm-hmm. that type of thing. So that was that particular raid. And that's part of the enemy too. Are these criminal drug dealers who work with the Taliban to control the economy there, and obviously that's not a healthy thing for anyone long term.
So what was it like? Or actually, why is Sergeant Warren Coughlin of Hanover mentioned in the book?
Well, for one thing, I'm a New Hampshire guy, a
mm-hmm.
Granite Stater, and I'm always on the lookout for Granite Staters, New Hampshire folks when I'm traveling around the world. And in Delaram with 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines, I met several New Hampshire people. There's a sergeant from Plastow, not far from here. And Master Gunnery Sergeant Coughlin, I have a picture of himself and me. Mm-hmm. He was with the civil affairs effort in Delaram, and he did magnificent work building things and digging wells and building schools or helping to build schools, that type of thing. And that part of the war is very important. There's what we call kinetic activities, where you're shooting weapons at each other or whatever. and then the civil affairs component, where you're trying to connect with the people and help the people and show the people different ways and better ways and make their lives better and have them realize, that they don't have to be tied to Taliban drug lords or whatever. So Master Gunnery Sergeant Coughlin from Hanover was a key guy in that civil affairs effort. And yes, he's mentioned in the book, and I did mention he's from New Hampshire, of course.
Very nice. And you are also, you do sports medicine, and you teach a grad sociology course for Plymouth State University, and a professor at NHTI in Concord. So were you surprised that after everything you went through to get this book published, and we'll go over that in a minute, to be the winner of the 2012 Gold Medal Top Military Biography by the Military Writers Society of America?
Yes, Denise, that was a thrill. Yes, I teach.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That was a thrill. My day job is I teach sports management at NHTI Concord. Great place to be. And yes, I do teach that one grad course for Plymouth State University in sport and society, kind of a sociology of sports. I'm a sports guy, obviously. And I write a sports column for the Weirdest Times. So I put words together, and I have helped with a couple of books with History Division in the Marine Corps. So when I met with Fahim, and we stayed in touch, and he had wanted to do a book. He was talking into a voice recorder and keeping his experiences and having people sign waivers in case they use pictures or their words if his story ever get put together. So we stayed together. We stayed in touch and got together when we both got back to America. And of course, to get a book out, you need a publisher.
Right.
And I had actually met a guy who's pretty well known in Hollywood named Dale Dye, Captain Dale Dye. I met him at a combat correspondence convention in Reno, of all places. And I was interested in actually interviewing Dale at some point because the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam experience is something History Division is working on. Plus, I was aware, I'd heard of Dale. He was in Platoon, the movie, and he has a company called Warriors, Inc., and they help with military movies, as advisors and that type of thing. So Dale and I were in touch on something different, and I met Dale, interviewed Dale. He gave me one of his books, and I went back to Quantico, or a station at the time, and I was looking through his book, and I was wondering, I wonder who published his book. And it turns out a subsidiary of Warriors, Inc., so to speak, called Warriors Publishing Group, published that book. And that got my attention. I thought, well, Dale and his wife, Dr. Julia Dye, who runs WPG, the publishing group, they know the Marines and they know Hollywood, and Fahim has worked with the Marines and he's of Hollywood. If they're interested, maybe they might want to support us putting this book together. And so I kind of pitched it to them, and they thought about it for a while. They didn't jump right on it. And we actually, Fahim and I put together like a draft outline with a number of chapters showing how we would develop the story. And Dale and Julia looked at that and said, well, it's something that has potential, needs some work. And we worked on it for a year. And Dr. Julia is a wonderful editor and a tough editor. And also Dr. Kathy Smith from the New Hampshire Humanities Council, whom I met. I was giving a presentation in Concord about Afghanistan. I met Kathy, Dr. Smith in Concord. And she also spent a lot of time helping the writing process, the editing process. So Dr. Kathy on the East Coast and Dr. Julia on the West Coast, both very, very tough editors. They were both very tough on me and Fahim. But our product, I think, it turned out pretty good.
Really?
And I'm glad they made this work.
Were they as tough on you as you are on your students?
Tougher.
Tougher.
They were tougher on me than I am on my students, yes.
Tougher than a retired Marine. That's amazing.
Yeah, I've said it before. They were very exacting, and they had high standards, and they some of the chapters that we do, the A version and the B version and the C version, up to the J version, J, K, L, M, 14 different versions back and forth of these chapters before it got to where we could go to the next chapter.
Exactly.
So yes, very high standards. And I'm a writer in the sense I like to write, put words together. Although I don't have a PhD like both of them did, Dr. Kathy and Dr. Julia. I majored in social science and education, and I write, but I would never claim to be a PhD in English like they were. So they really knew how to fine tune it and edit it so that it could win this award. Yes. So to speak to that, of course, the Gold Medal Award. The book was nominated as one of 6 nominees during the summer. Of course, we were pushing it out here and there, and somebody from the MWSA, Military Writers Society of America, reviewed it and gave it a wonderful review, and then nominated it as one of 6 nominees for the top biography for military books. And the conference convention where the MWSA makes their awards was in Dayton on September 29th. So Fahim couldn't make it, but I made it a point to fly to Dayton just to be part of that and meet people, other writers, and get other books and go to workshops and network. And then went to the banquet. And then, of course, you hope that you win. I mean, that's why you're there. And it's not quite the Oscars, but when they say in the winner is, Fahim Speaks, yes, what a thrill. And that's been a vehicle, something that we've used to further promote the book, that it did win the Gold Medal Award for the top biography, top military biography in 2012. So.
Wow. So somebody reading the book, it's a biography, it covers different parts of what's going on in Afghanistan. So it helps them have a better understanding of what's going on. And it's almost current events because it's still unraveling. Yes,
excellent point in trying to market or sell the book. Yes, I think somebody who reads this book, it's very current. It talks about the struggles in Afghanistan, the military part of it, the civil affairs part of it, the cultural part of it. I already spoke about how it's dedicated to women. Mm-hmm. So there's that component. There's a history component. Fahim's family is part of Afghanistan's history. His dad worked for the bank, Afghan bank in Kabul. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned, his mom worked for the president of Afghanistan. So and then when the Soviets came in, I mean, we talk about the history, about how President Amin had President Taraki murdered, and then President Amin was murdered, and Babrak Karmal, the Soviet puppet, came in, and then the 7 Mujahideen groups that made up the resistance. Charlie Wilson's War, there's a chapter on that. So there's some history, there's some current events type material that's relevant today. Mm-hmm. And, of course, the love story and the war story and the adventure story and the Hollywood stuff. There's a lot to his journey.
Wow. And where else did you do the research to collaborate different parts of his story?
Well, of course, nowadays the Internet is ubiquitous. You can Google, get on the World Wide Web, and find all kinds of information to kind of flesh out different parts of the chapters. For example, one of the Hollywood chapters, where he's working with Tom Hanks and Julia Roberts and Philip Seymour Hoffman, and Mike Nichols was the director of that. To just go online and just confirm that Mike Nichols has won all these awards, and which Oscars did Tom Hanks win and when, and Julia Roberts and Philip Seymour Hoffman, just to flesh out some of their backgrounds. That's part of the kind of easy research. Interviewing people, Fahim was a primary interview, but there's material in there. General Nicholson, for example, was a top general in Afghanistan when I was there, and also General Mills, mm-hmm. who replaced him. Brigadier General Nicholson and then Major General Mills. I interviewed both of those flag officers. And some of the insights that they shared became part of the book. For example, General Nicholson shared that he wanted to use tanks in a certain rare linear type battle. But he didn't have any tanks because the Army commander, the 4-star Army general who was there when he came in, said you can't have tanks. The Army doesn't have tanks. We don't want to use tanks because that conjures up imagery, or so they thought, that conjured up imagery of the Soviets' heavy-handed use of mechanized, arms.
Mm-hmm.
So that's in one of the chapters. So stuff like that, I think, is interesting. And there's actually quite a lot of stuff from other interviews that has been woven into Fahim's narrative.
Wow. So as a Marine Corps historian, it sounds like you're taking sporadic notes about what's going on in different places. Where do all those notes end up?
Well, good question. If anybody from History Division sees this, and I'm sure we'll send links to them. Yeah, what happens is all these interviews that I did in Afghanistan, I came back to Quantico, Virginia, and I didn't have to transcribe them. There was I had scores of interviews with people, but I had to go through them again and summarize them and say, okay, at the 20-minute mark, General Nicholson.
So there are video interviews.
Audio.
Audio.
Yep.
Okay.
For the most part, audio, and so we have interview transcripts and summaries of from Lance Corporals to Generals to Fahim Fazli. Just talking to people, getting their photos. Bringing back some documents as well, a few documents and some artifacts to just bring back to History Division in Quantico so that they can actually have firsthand accounts from the people who were there while they were there, while this information is fresh in their minds. They come in from a patrol or an operation, and they talk to me, and I, of course, I'm a Marine. I'm an infantry officer, and so I talk the talk a little bit, and I understand some of the questions to ask, and I know the jargon and the acronyms, and understand certain questions to ask, and they'll talk to me, and they did talk to me very comfortably. There was a trust element. Not every military person, not every Marine always trusts the mainstream media. A lot of this goes back to Vietnam. But they would talk to me. I think they all generally seem to appreciate actually being asked. Okay, tell me your story. What did you? And once they get going, then they love to tell their stories to fellow Marines. So we record that, transcribe it, and catalog it with the photos, so that in the future, people who are researching aspects of military history, Marine history, operational history in Afghanistan, they can look for certain keywords like Helmand Province or whatever, and or say Operation Cobra's Anger, and do a search for that operation, and then find out who was part of that operation that we did interviews with, and so that's the essence of what we did with the material, or what I did with what I got in Afghanistan for History Division.
Wow. So does the general public have access to that information, or is it slowly let out like the JFK files every 50 years? Or
good question. It's mostly unclassified. Some of it is classified. It depends. But most of these interviews, right up front, in fact, I can remember saying, okay, this is an unclassified interview. Lieutenant Colonel Mike Moffett speaking with Sergeant whoever in Delaram, Afghanistan. So, Sergeant, tell me where you're from, and we'll start that way, and what do you do, and then we'll just let the stuff flow. So, yes, to answer your question, most of it is unclassified, and researchers or scholars or just history buffs can go and do go to History Division in Quantico and request access to some of these interviews. The one I did with General Nicholson, I know a couple actually of prominent big-time authors did make requests to access. They were a bit longer. My two interviews with General Nicholson, a little bit longer than the one I did with the Lance Corporal machine gunner. Yeah, scholars and writers, have and do and will ask for this access to these interviews so that they can flesh out their stories.
how long has the government been keeping historians on in the military? How far does it go back, do you think?
I should know that. History Division goes back many years, and of course, when there's no war, like between Desert Storm and Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. It was like 10 years where there wasn't a whole lot of big-time wars, so to speak. There really wasn't a need for field historians, but when there are troops in harm's way, Marine Corps University and History Division likes to send historians, trained historians there to help document what's going on. And in the past, there have been combat correspondents who in the short term, like for newspapers, will interview people, and there'll be a record in that fashion of stuff that went on in the wars. But historians, in the way that I was one, that's a more recent phenomenon, pretty largely since Vietnam, although people did that type of thing before that as combat correspondents, if not actual historians.
Wow. So did you have to get clearance from Quantico to publish the book?
Did I have to get? I alerted the folks in Quantico that I was working on a book, and they were interested in that. That's a good question. We never. Of course, I was retired by the time by 2011, when we spent that whole year working on the book. But I used unclassified materials and material that's out there everywhere. And a lot of this in the book is non-military. I mean, Fahim's story from being a boy in Afghanistan and being in Hollywood, none of that really is classified or part of military history anyway.
Right.
The last 4 chapters are very heavy in Marine Corps experiences in Afghanistan, but that's all unclassified. But no, I did not have anybody clear it ahead of time, and I haven't gotten into trouble yet, so I think I think I'm okay. I think we're okay.
Okay, so if somebody reads the book, what type of lessons do you think they could learn from Fahim's life?
Again, Denise, I'm glad you asked that. And the lessons, I think there are a lot of lessons. There are history lessons, of course, and cultural awareness lessons. That's all part of his narrative, his journey. But the lesson that I think a lot of people could draw from is a lesson of inspiration. We keep saying, or I keep saying in describing his journey, I refer to patriotism and perseverance. He's somebody who just didn't give up. In fact, even now, he signs books, Never Give Up, Follow Your Dreams. Just as a quick Hollywood aside, he and I were doing a book signing at the American Legion Post in Hollywood. And one of the people there who's actually filming us, like, is happening here. He's the son-in-law to Penny Marshall, who I remember Penny Marshall from Laverne and Shirley, and she's a big Hollywood person in all kinds of different manners. She's a big Hollywood person. And so her son-in-law asked Fahim and I to sign a book for Penny, and so Fahim said, he signed it for her, said, "Dear Penny, never give up, follow your dreams, Fahim Fawzi." And I had to chuckle, and then I signed it, as well. I'm not sure if Penny has ever got it or read it, but I had to chuckle because I'm not sure that Fahim realized who Penny Marshall was. I'm sure they didn't watch Laverne and Shirley in Kabul when he was a kid. But anyway, patriotism and perseverance, never give up. He wanted to be an actor, and it's hard. I mean, I'm not of that world, but I know enough about Hollywood. I think we all know that unless you're really lucky or know somebody, it's a tough business to get into. And for 15 years, he paid his dues and networked and got his vouchers and credits and contacts to finally get a Screen Actors Guild membership. So perseverance, never give up, that's a lesson. And patriotism, again, I particularly like this because after 9/11, a lot of people, I think, were looking for more people from Islamic cultures, from that part of the world, to just stand up and condemn the intolerance of some of the factions from that part of the world, the ones who took down the Twin Towers and who were terrorists. And Fahim is unafraid to do that. loves America, says he loves America, and he doesn't just talk the talk, he walks the walk. He went back to Afghanistan. He didn't have to be with the Marines. He didn't have to have a price on his head. He didn't have to get shot at or almost blown up. He asked for that. And is that patriotism? Yeah, it's his adopted country. It's a country, and this is in the book, after 9/11, he was away, he was stuck in Las Vegas with his family. Airports were shut down. And so some of his neighbors, after 9/11, one of his neighbors, sorry, he was missing. So she, I think it was a she, alerted the authorities. And so the FBI came looking for him. The FBI tracked him down and wanted to question him. Why? Because he was an Afghan American, unaccounted for after 9/11. And, you know, what did he do wrong? Nothing. And yet the FBI's after him, trying to find him and question him because he's African American. And some people, I think, would be upset about being profiled. But and I'm sure he wasn't thrilled about it. It was probably frazzling. It's in the book. But he understood, you know, the big picture and that people were scared. And yes, you know, he is Afghan and nobody knew where he was for a while. And so here's somebody who was profiled, and the FBI came after him, yet he loves America and is a patriot and put a uniform on and served his country to great effect. He has numerous kudos from the Marines and the generals, and they gave him the flag that flew over Camp Leatherneck, among other things, to recognize his efforts and his contributions to the cause.
Great. So is there a movie in the works sometime in the future?
Well, yes. Well, there's going to be, who knows? That's a tough thing to do. But Fahim is an actor, and I know that he has always dreamed of being in, well, he's in the movies now. He was in Argo. I don't know if I mentioned that. I know Argo is up for a Golden Globe and maybe an Oscar. And he has a small speaking role in Argo. I won't give it away. It's not a big deal. He plays a bad guy. He's always a bad guy. He played Saddam Hussein on Spike TV and on and on.
Oh, no.
But yes, we've talked a little bit about this, and you know, people have read his story and said this could or should be a movie. It's a tough thing to do, but there are a couple of people in California who are working on a preliminary outline draft concept for a possible movie that may get some consideration someday. Dale Dye and Julia, of course, are of Hollywood. You know, Dale's record of productions and movies and TV shows that he's been involved with go way back. So he is somebody. I think we have Tom Hanks's blurb on our cover. I think that may be a function of Dale having worked with Tom on Saving Private Ryan. Of course, Tom Hanks worked with Fahim on Charlie Wilson's work. So it's turning into a long answer, but will there be a movie? I don't know. I hope so. I hope that at least is on the radar screen for that, because that's a license for Fahim and his friends like myself to dream of this really. So
would he play his older self, maybe?
We talked about that. At one point, of course, he's 46 years old now, and that he couldn't play his younger self. You know, would he play his father? And we kind of talked about if this ever happened, maybe that wouldn't be the best role because his father was kind of mean to him, and that's in the book. But we did identify some potential roles. Actually, this Afghan named Abdul, who was like a coyote, who guided Fahim and his father and brother through the mountains when they had their adventurous, harrowing escape from the Soviets. That might be somebody he could play. Of course, he speaks Pashto and Dari, and he's Afghan, and he has a SAG card. He's already an actor. So if a movie ever happened, I hope there'd be some role that I'm sure he'd like to have some role in it, but we'll see.
Absolutely. All right, so that our audience understands where you might be coming from or a little more about you as a writer, what's your favorite book of all time?
I love to read. And I have read some books. I read, you know, Tom Sawyer probably 10 times, and I love to read. Favorite book? Gosh. Well, I'm a history guy, and William Manchester wrote 2 books, actually 3 books, on Winston The Last Lion. And William Manchester, Marine, who died a few years ago, never finished the third book in the three-book series. I guess he had it mostly done, but then he unfortunately passed away. So the two books that he did finish on Winston Churchill, William Manchester's books, I guess I'd say are among my favorites. And the great news is that the third book has been finished. Another author picked up and is finished the third Churchill book by William Manchester. And I've let it be known that that would be a good Christmas present for me. So we'll see what happens. But that I would say William Manchester's Churchill books are my favorites.
So it sounds like Fahim Speaks will appeal to the romantic at heart, the war buffs, the historians.
Yes. Fahim Speaks, I think, as I've alluded to earlier, the cover. If somebody looks at the cover, it's Fahim. It's a little bit menacing of a cover, but it's become our brand, and it is dedicated to women, as we've talked about. And yes, there's a love story, and women who read that part of it will identify with that. And yes, it's not just a war story. It's a cultural story. It's a love story, adventure. His escape to Pakistan.
A story about not being so quick to stereotype people.
Yes, lessons to be learned there. Love story, adventure story, lessons learned, military story, Hollywood story, true story. What a great story.
Misconceptions around who he is as a person.
Yeah, he's not a terrorist. Interestingly, when he was trying to become an interpreter, he was interviewed by the CIA, and they asked him, he said he was an actor, and the CIA person said, "So what do you do?" And he says, "Well, I'm a terrorist." Excuse me. And then the CIA guy said, "Well, excuse me," because he just told the CIA he was a terrorist, and his English he might have used different words. He should have said, "I play terrorists on TV."
Right.
So there are misconceptions, excuse me, about Fahim. Is he a bad guy? No, he's a great guy. He's a patriot and he's a good guy. So.
Can I read to the audience what Tom Hanks wrote?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's see. Tom Hanks of Charlie Wilson's War wrote Afghanistan is a complicated place. It says Fahim Fazli.
Fahim Fazli.
Fahim Fazli, thank you. And he knows. I think you should read it because you're probably more familiar.
Yeah, from Tom Hanks, he wrote, Afghanistan is a complicated place, says Fahim Fazli, and he knows. Born in that enigmatic nation when it was at peace, coming of age as it became a place of terror, and even helping Hollywood recreate the years of war against the USSR, he, Fahim, has a story told in the languages of his origin, yet understood by the ears of the Western world. As both history and memoir, when Fahim Fazli speaks, we are fascinated. Tom Hanks, Charlie Wilson's War. Which is wonderful to have a blurb from perhaps one of the preeminent actors in America today.
Absolutely. It's an amazing book. So I hope people will get out and read it. And are there any last thoughts that you'd like to leave the audience with?
Well, again, Denise, thank you for having me here. And it's Fahim Speaks, F-A-H-I-M. And it's available via Amazon.com. It's available...
and isn't there a website for them?
Yes, it's available via Kindle as well as traditional book like this. And there is a website, FahimSpeaks.com, that has all kinds of material on there. In fact, Fahim put together that website himself. He's also a marketer. He does posters and YouTube clips, and he really...
it is a great site, by the way.
Check it out. You've had a chance to look at it.
I have.
Yeah, we got a couple little things to correct on it, but it's got all kinds of Hollywood stuff and, and stuff from Afghanistan and links and blogs. And FahimSpeaks.com is full of information. And hopefully some folks will check it out.
All right. Well, it sounds like a great book. Thank you so much for your service to our country and for acquiring this historical story for us and sharing it with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Denise. It's a pleasure to be here and really appreciate it.
Anytime. So Keep asking questions. Check out the book Fahim Speaks, and we'll see you next time on Fairy Tale Access.